Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. We've got a action-packed agenda, learning about regional food business centers. So again, the purpose of this virtual dialogue is to build interest and share information on what we think is a promising program from USDA, the Regional Food Business Centers. This dialogue is meant to create the space for discussion and connections for federal collaboration. Federal investments are increasingly going to regional scale, and this is a great opportunity to be prepared. Because as we feel, regional food systems really have the potential to address vulnerabilities caused in part by the corporate consolidation of our food system. These regional food business centers are a new approach to USDA programming that embrace the complexity of food systems. They have the potential to facilitate local investment into local and regional supply chains, which may be more reflective of a diversity of values beyond profit alone. With the request for applications expected this summer, we want to prime the pump in a way, so food policy councils and allied organizations understand the value and relevance of this program to community food systems. And while the aspirations of this program are noble, it is important to recognize that systemically entrenched power imbalances and barriers to food systems justice exist across our country. Without vigilance and advocacy from community organizations, these power imbalances could be easily exacerbated. Therefore, communities must be centered, diverse voices must be amplified, and representation must be integrated into all aspects of regional food business centers so that resilient, diverse, and connected supply chains provide the foundation for food systems equity. So on that note, we do have a great agenda planned for today to both share information while generating interest and excitement, but also holding the space for you to connect with your peers in the region and begin to consider how to bring community into this opportunity. So our agenda for today, hopefully I haven't used all of my 5 minutes. We've got 3 panelists that will give various perspectives on both this program and working across a region. First off is Kate Fitzgerald, who will give us some of the inside information on this program, speaking more to its provenance, but also like what we know and what we know we don't know, because as we'll find out, there hasn't been a whole lot of public information shared on this program. So Kate, we really appreciate any insights you're able to share with our group here. Next, we'll have Dr. Rebecca Jablonski, who's an associate professor at Colorado State University, talking about the role land grant institutions can provide in facilitating collaboration across a region. And then Sherri Dugger, who's the executive director of Socially Responsible Agriculture Project and a reinvigorator of the Midwest Agriculture Working Group, who will round it out to talk about weaving networks across the region. So again, we really thank everybody for joining us today. And with that, Kate, take it away.
Hello, colleagues. My name is Kate Fitzgerald, and I am an independent consultant working in Washington, D.C. on various projects that connect primarily low-income consumers with local and regional agriculture. And what we're talking about today, Brian put his finger on it, is we know conceptually what USDA's idea is, but we don't have a ton of information about exactly what the plan is. So what I thought I could do is just start by giving where the funding is coming from, because that really helps set the parameter of what the potential is. Last year, when Congress passed the American Rescue Plan, embedded in it was $4 billion to go to USDA to do work to develop more resilient, distributed, and competitive food systems. And that money went to USDA. It's essentially a blank check for the department to decide its best uses. A bunch of funds have already flowed out to help support the development of new, more local, small and mid-sized meat processing facilities, providing training and technical assistance for folks to do meat processing. This Friday, I believe applications from states and tribal entities are due for $400 million through which states and tribes can buy local food for emergency distribution. And then there's also another $200 million for states and tribes to buy local food to be used through the school meals programs. The point is USDA has got this bucket of money with which it is trying to meet a whole bunch of the various challenges it sees in the local and regional food system. So the exciting piece is they have money and the administration is committed to reinvigorating more regionalized food systems. The potential challenge is that until the money is spent, it can be rescinded by Congress. So what started out as a $4 billion pot may actually end up in the real world being less than that. So about this time last year, USDA Ag Marketing Service put out the word to food policy networks, various supply chain entities, that they were percolating the idea of creating regional centers to do place-based type support for the development and expansion of regional food systems. The initial idea was that perhaps these centers would follow the regions established by USDA Food and Nutrition Service for the nutrition programs. And the idea was behind that conceptually was an interesting one, that USDA buys and distributes a lot of food through the Food and Nutrition Service, and through better alignment between the Food and Nutrition Service regions and the agricultural production, you might be able to develop some momentum that could kickstart and quickly push more dollars through that, through USDA foods. Question, define regional centers. You're right, let me go back. So what USDA suggested they were interested in doing a year ago was provide resources, meaning money and staff structure, to entities to do work with USDA programs around local and regional food systems out into the field. So essentially doing cooperative agreements with collaborations or land grant universities or various kinds of nonprofit entities to, in regions, provide training and technical assistance to help put the word out in communities about the programs that exist. Also have little pots of money through which the regions could do grant making or establish lending programs with a little bit of investment. And finally, putting contracts out or subcontracts to local entities to provide business training, financial training, food safety training, the various kinds of training supports that players across the supply chain in regions would need to be successful. So conceptually, the idea is creating, almost one can think of it as a mini extension service or a structure for AMS for the first time to fund boots on the ground, although they're not necessarily going to be USDA staff, USDA funding to entities or individuals that could do the kind of technical assistance that Extension Service is designed to do. So initially the idea was to do 7 regional centers. There was some idea that the FNS regions did not make a ton of sense from food shed or ecological production criteria. And so USDA took feedback back. The idea went up the chain, and Secretary Vilsack was given several different kinds of model proposals, and he became very engaged in the process, which is a good thing because it means that this actually is going to happen. Unfortunately, what it also means is we don't know exactly what the Secretary's vision is. It hasn't been shared yet. What we do know now is there is a dedicated fund of, my guess would be between $400 and $800 million that will be used to seed regional work of some kind through regions that make some kind of sense but we don't yet know what that is yet. And that there will be a application or request for proposals that will be published by USDA Ag Marketing Service sometime this summer, to which regional groups can then respond, suggesting or outlining how they would achieve the goals that USDA has articulated to do work in the geographies in which they have connections. I think that is probably what we know to date. Well, the format is not going to be a grant, so it will not be in the strictures of existing grant proposals. What USDA will do is write contracts. Essentially, they're called cooperative agreements in USDA parlance, but what they will do is the request for proposals will outline the types of activities that USDA wants conducted. It will explain what the different geographic boundaries of regions are, and will allow any number of kinds of entities to come together and propose how they could achieve these work efforts with the funding that's available. And I think I'll stop there and leave plenty of time for questions.
Yeah. Thanks, Kate. I really appreciate it. So in lieu of questions, we're going to save it for the breakout group for everyone to talk together. If you do have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. And I know, Kate, you've been paying attention. We'll try to respond as best we can. I realized after you started speaking, in all my excitement to get into the meat of this issue, that I forgot to introduce myself, my colleagues, and the work that we do. Yay for me. So hi, my name is Brian Sobel. I'm a senior program officer with the Johns Hopkins Center for Livable Future. You'll see my colleagues, Dr. Patty Anderson and Karen Bessarab, who are super helpful and really, doing all the troubleshooting behind the scenes to make this look like a seamless event. So appreciate them. The Johns Hopkins Center for Livable Future, its mission is to promote research and to develop and communicate information about the complex interrelationships among diet, food production, environment, and human health, advance an ecological perspective in reducing threats to the health of the public, and promote policies that protect health, the global environment, and the ability to sustain life for future generations. We are based in the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. I think that mouthful really says it all. So thank you again for joining us today. It's my pleasure to pass the mic on to Dr. Becca Jablonski, who is an associate professor and co-director of the Food Systems Institute at Colorado State University, and food systems extension economist in the Department of Agriculture and Resource Economics. Her work focuses on strengthening rural-urban linkages through rigorous practical evaluation. So Becca, thank you very much for joining us today. Excuse me, Dr. Jablonski. We look forward to hearing what you have to say today.
Thanks, Brian. Great to be here with all of you. And thanks to Kate, that was great and really helpful. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why I think land-grant universities in some cases can make really good leads on these regional food business centers and bring in a number of the partners that we want to have included. But I just want to give the caveat that I don't think that all land-grant universities are going to be in the best situation to do this, but I think that there are some in different regions that'll be well positioned. And I thought I'd give some reasons about why and the kinds of things that we are able to do from sort of a land-grant university place or perspective, and the kinds of ways that we can have relationships to, I think, fulfill the mission of what I understand the USDA Ag Marketing Service wants to accomplish through these regional food business centers. So the first is that you may be aware is that there's at least one land-grant university in every state, and that in addition to the land-grant universities in each state, many states also have these 1890s, which are the historically Black colleges and universities. And then we also have the 1994 tribal institutions in some places as well. And so one thing to understand is that land-grant universities are not just those, the 1862s, but they also do include the 1890s and 1994s. In addition, land-grant universities through USDA have access to resources that essentially sort of provide resources and some sort of mandate to actually do collaboration across state and within regions. So as an example, the Hatch Act of 1887 established the Multi-State Research Fund. And I can tell you that as somebody who, we have different types of appointments as professors at land-grant universities. So I have a research extension appointment primarily. So I have responsibility to work with extension, our food systems extension team. But part of my funding also comes from our agricultural experiment station in these Hatch funds. And so I'm forced to basically show that I'm doing this work across university on an annual basis. And the way that I have chosen to do that work is through participation in a group called Agriculture of the Middle. This group has been doing research together for about 15 years. And I'm not entirely sure, but I would think we have about 25 people that participate, where we have a focus on really trying to understand why there's this disappearance of mid-scale producers and the kinds of infrastructure that are required to really support that ag of the middle moving forward, sort of combating what I think Brian was mentioning at that introduction around some of the consolidation and concentration along the supply chain. There also are institutions set up to provide support for enhanced linkages across land-grant universities. So one of them that I participate in is this interinstitutional network for food, agriculture, and sustainability. It's been housed out of the University of California, Davis, although the support person's not there physically anymore. And this includes a lot of land-grant universities that are really trying to understand how we do a better job connecting food systems scholars and educators and researchers and activists to really, as you can see here, catalyze frontier work in food systems, increase capacity and build U.S. food system resilience, raise the visibility of research-based insights, including increasing racial equity, and just sort of diversifying who's doing work in food systems. And so I really just wanted to make this point that it's not just that land-grant universities are serving the state, but also have these networks to support cross-state collaboration and regional collaboration. Within each of the states, we have extension systems that I'm guessing many of you on the call are familiar with. And the resources that are devoted to those extension networks are different in each state and how those extension networks function. I can tell you most about what we do in Colorado State University. The different colors represent how our regions are designated within the state of Colorado, and the little points here represent where we have an extension office. I co-lead our food systems extension team as part of my job. And we have about 36 agents that do work in food systems across the university. And we're actually currently hiring for 6 different regional food systems leads, including 1 statewide food lead. In addition, we have our ag experiment station that I mentioned. And we actually have 9 different locations of that agricultural experiment station. So everywhere you see that CSU RAM is where we have a different research center. And part of the reason is that we're really trying to understand the different types of microclimates and opportunities around production agriculture, including farms and ranches that are selling through local and regional food markets in those different places across the state. And I think one of the innovations that's happening is the development of a new urban agricultural experiment station at the CSU Spur campus, where there's going to be demonstration research around vertical agriculture and urban agriculture, and I think some other kinds of market opportunities, kitchen incubators, et cetera. One of the things that we've taken on more recently at Colorado State University, and we may be a little bit more unique in this role, is that when the Colorado Food Systems Advisory Council was established, Extension had a seat at the table there. And so that was about a decade ago. But actually, in the more recent iterations of that bill, the Governor's Food Policy Council was actually taken out of the Colorado Department of Agriculture and moved to Colorado State University. So we've recently established a Food Systems Institute at CSU. And the person who's the program lead for our institute is also the coordinator for the Governor's Food Policy Council. And so in this way, it has this really diverse membership and representation in that council that we have really direct relationships with and discussions with at CSU. And it gives us, I think, some vantage point into that broad network of colleagues working across lots of different departments at the state level, as well as, for example, we have representatives from different types of markets like farmers markets and wholesale and distribution markets. We also have representatives of people who are using different types of food assistance programs, and so better understanding can take into consideration their experiences, for example, accessing SNAP or Double Up Food Buck programs. And one of the other things about the Colorado Food Systems Advisory Council is that it's legislatively mandated to work with our local food policy councils. And so you can see here, these are the local food policy councils or coalitions that we have in the state of Colorado. And so we've been working to try to convene some of these groups, both through COPSAC as well as the Food Systems Institute, to really understand what are some of these unique regional needs, where do we have different types of producers that are underserved, and what are the kinds of technical assistance or support that are needed to help these different groups, including with a special, I should say, specific focus on socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers. So one of the things that we've been looking towards is a Colorado Food Summit. We held the first in 2020, and we are now making changes moving forward, recognizing I think we had a pretty successful event, but that we wanted to also do some things differently. And so members of each of those local food policy councils are actually serving as the planning committee for the upcoming food summit. And in leading up to that event, we've been holding these different regional convenings to, again, really try to elevate the needs of these different regional councils and coalitions, and so bringing them together. And through, I think, this work where we've been actually trying to bring together these various networks, we, for example, have established a one-stop shop platform for these different Colorado food system efforts, which we've been calling the Colorado Food Systems Coalition. But you can see here, you can access the Governor's Food Systems Advisory Council. We've created a mapping and reporting tool. We've got information on some statewide assessments that we've done. We've got the local food policy councils linked in here. And so really trying to bring things together under one umbrella. And because this network has come together, we're also now really trying to think about assembling all of these various programs that provide technical assistance and support. And I used to do work in the Northeast and in New York, and I know that there is, I would say, much more depth of resources that are offered throughout the Northeast than there are maybe in a place like Colorado. But even in a place like Colorado, we've been able to identify 36 organizations or programs so far that are doing this kind of technical assistance. And prior to when we just started putting this together in really anticipation of thinking about this, the proposed regional food business centers, nobody had ever done this before, right? So we have all of these different entities that are providing the support without really, I think, thinking comprehensively about where there are gaps in the services that we're providing, both regionally, as well as to different types of socially disadvantaged operations or business supply chain infrastructure. And I think the other pieces, and then in gaps in the types of technical assistance that are provided. Another advantage of partnering with land-grant universities is the ability to couple these connections with data. And for example, in our department, we have access to a lot of restricted access data, which means that in times we can reduce some of the survey burden on producers. So just as an example, we have the access to the raw census data. So we can actually do things like, for beginning farmers that were beginning operations in 2007, did they continue to exist in 2017? Those that were more successful or continued to exist, what did they look like? What did the kinds of resources did they have access to? What types of local food markets were they selling through? And so if we can couple that data with the richness of community lived experience and that network, I think we can tell a richer story that hopefully is beneficial to everybody involved. We also have existing national partnerships and resources to support grant management. And I think many of you know who do this kind of work that managing these large grants is not easy. And so that can also be beneficial. Just as an example, right now we're the lead institution on the USDA Ag Marketing Service Local and Regional Food System Response to COVID grant, where we've been able to bring together 17 different communities of practice, including the Farmers Market Coalition. I saw Wallace Centers on here, the Local Catch Network, and really trying to be able to provide support. We do have institutional challenges, right? And things don't move necessarily as quickly, but we have those financial management systems in place. But I think for land grants to be successful as leads here, that there are a number of things that we really have to be cognizant about, right? And to be able to center a community. So I think one is that we really need to make sure, and whoever is reviewing these, I know they're not grants, but in the cooperative agreements and making these decisions, that the lead applicant can demonstrate strong pre-existing relationships with diverse food system stakeholders. And yes, we're all used to getting letters of support, and those are all well and good, but I would actually say we need to go deeper than that. You know, can we show that there are existing subcontracts in place, right? That there's actually been money provided out to these communities, that there's been reports or plans or projects, right, that have been done in collaboration that the community really feels have provided value. And we need to be able to demonstrate that really concretely to show, you know, that the lead is able to provide what Kate's talking about with some of these mini grants back into the field. To the commitment to participatory frameworks, right? Like that we're not just going to have listening sessions. I think people are tired, and those can be extractive and not inclusion, not really thinking about this inclusion lens, right? We need to be very committed to how are any data generated, and thinking about data in a very broad term going to be shared. How do we share resources? And how do we really work together to identify what some of the opportunities are? Evidence of commitment to an equity framework, right? I think that means complete transparency over budgets, management decisions, right? Policy decisions, all of that. And there are some barriers through land-grant universities in terms of some of those pieces. And so we need to be able to work through those. And then finally, some kind of community-led and meaningfully engaged advisory board. So you can think about the SARE model that many of you may be familiar with, where you would have land-grant universities that host these different, the SARE programs, but then there's advisory boards made up of the community that's supposed to be served that are making some of these decisions. I worked in New York for a number of years, and I'm very familiar with the New York Farm Viability Institute would be another example, where that's an advisory board that's entirely farmers that are making the decisions, all of the funding decisions. And so I think that there's some models there that we can look at. So anyway, I'm happy to answer any questions in the small working groups later.
Brian, you're muted.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jablonski. That was a fantastic presentation and a wealth of information. Yeah, I think really highlights the importance of land grants as institutions and not just the universities, that in fact, there are extension campuses throughout the state that help to facilitate those feedback loops and reciprocal information flows that are just so critical for participation and community engagement. So I really appreciate your presentation. And now for our last speaker before we head into the breakout, Sherri Dugger is Executive Director of the Socially Responsible Agriculture Project. She recently reestablished the Midwest Sustainable Agriculture Working Group that has worked to amplify community voices for both state and federal advocacy. So Sherri, I'll leave it to you to take it away.
Thanks so much for having me. As a brief intro for me, I am the Executive Director of Socially Responsible Agriculture Project, also known as SRAP. I have a small permaculture farm that we're building out here in Spencer, Indiana, and I've served in as executive director for various other organizations, including Indiana Farm Machine and Women Food and Agriculture Network. I did start facilitating the Msoc group back in January of 2019. So I'll get into that a little bit. And I want to just for context, give you an idea of why I'm talking about Msoc is really about working across state lines and how we have a great need established for collaboration and this opportunity, it sounds like with these regional centers, obviously is calling for a lot of collaboration between organizations and coalitions and food policy councils, et cetera, and really getting communities engaged in what's going to happen with that program. So let me go back to my PDF. Reviving Msoc, just to give you a little bit of idea, in late 2018, I began talking with other organizational leaders about the possibility of reviving the Midwest Sustainable Agriculture Working Group. So by January of 2019, we began meeting monthly, and I have facilitated a meeting each month since then to discuss various efforts around state level policy and campaign building. So we held these meetings rather loosely for the first year or so, beginning discussions in mid to late 2020 about developing a mission and vision statement for the group that provided us an opportunity to really explore who we were, what we hoped to become, and what both long and short-term goals we wanted to establish and what we wanted to accomplish. In January of 2021, we completed a guidance document, and then we began a new process, both of which I'll explain here a little bit. I also wanted to say that I've, again, been involved in a few conversations recently about what to do with Msoc and whether or not we keep it going, whether or not we expand it, et cetera. These conversations have kind of led us to another path of like what happened to the sustainable agriculture working groups that used to be all over the country in various regions around the country. So that's been kind of an interesting conversation that I'll touch back on here in a minute. So in those conversations, we did talk about our statement of need. And I don't want to read this word for word for you all, but during that exploratory process, we wrote out what we saw as a statement of need for the work that Msoc would do. In essence, we saw the need to connect with one another, to share relevant information on policy and practice with each other, and to collaborate, to build capacity and take advantage of opportunities to build a better food and agriculture systems when possible. We also saw a real need for pushing for racial equity within our food and agriculture systems, bringing in diverse voices to our group and supporting ally BIPOC organizations. Here's our mission and vision statement. We came up with both. Overall, our work was about building power to create the change we wanted to see. So I do want to just take a minute to point out who we are. We defined ourselves during these discussions as organizations that come from the 12 states within the North Central SARE region. We did begin a new process after these conversations. This slide speaks to that a little bit. We developed essentially these in-focus topics, which would be a series of about 6 months of meetings and discussions, usually themed topics. We had one on COVID and dealing with that and how the organizations were dealing with that. We had one around racial equity. We had one around soil health and climate. We developed committees that would work together to find speakers for these topics and then to share resources as we could as they were made available. We had some intended outputs and outcomes. The idea behind these efforts were to gather and analyze data, identify assets and gaps, and to help us prioritize our work. One big thing we heard from the members within Msoc was that they needed to build capacity for their work. They didn't have funding at the time to try to learn what they didn't know in order to push for better policy on state levels. We also heard a real need for taking what's happening in regional pushes and at state levels back to the national stage for boosting better federal policy efforts. So there were some challenges along the way. This is what we did essentially with these in-focus groups up until around early 2021, or I'm sorry, until recently from early 2021. I want to say when I was asked to give this presentation, I was actually a little surprised by the request. While these in-focus discussions have been very helpful, many in attendance have often celebrated and complimented the sharing of this information. I've always felt a little unsure of how successful and impactful Msoc has been since I got it going again. I've oftentimes joked with others that maybe I don't know how to throw a really good party. The meetings have always remained small. The participants have varied a little bit. Very few folks have consistently attended over the years, except for me. This feeling and this questioning of the success of this group led me to start asking questions of others. I began talking with potential funders about what they hoped might become of Msoc. I've talked with many of the same organizational leaders I spoke to early on to get Msoc developed again. And I've ventured down some new paths and had those extended conversations with national organizational leaders about whether there's a need for Msoc, whether it needs to grow, how it can be structured, who might fund it, and who might lead it, quite frankly, because I don't have a lot of capacity to help another entity grow. And I'm also leading socially responsible agriculture project, which is a big job. So back to that big question, that those conversations that I've had with all of those organizational leaders have brought up this other question of what happened to the SOGs in general, with the exception of the Northeast group, of course, which is still alive and well. I'm not actually going to answer that question. The fact is, I don't know. I wasn't around and don't understand the intimate details of what happened to all of the other SOGs or what even happened with the first iteration of Msoc. What I do wonder is whether there's a need to do a little research to explore, reviving these SOGs in each region of the country, if for nothing else, but to influence policy and to influence how funds are being managed for projects like the community centers. I have also spoken with some of the other organizational leaders who participate in Msoc currently. There doesn't seem to be consensus on what to do next to build movement power across state lines, or I should say across regions. Excuse me. What there does seem to be consensus on, at least within these organizations within Msoc, is that we would like assistance working on state level efforts, sharing good policy, sharing bad policy, and learning from one another in order to build our own individual and organizational capacities. We need the time to and the energy to participate. But also I would argue that we need to really engage the communities we serve, hear their stories, support their work, and focus our messaging to build and push narratives out through our organizations and beyond. We need to help to bring the stories, the lived experiences, and the truths of the grassroots communities to those who need to hear them. And I would hope that the universities, for instance, in this project will be bound to the needs, desires, and voices of the people who stand to benefit most from these funding opportunities. At Socially Responsible Agriculture Project, I'm hoping to create an impacted community advisory group, for instance, so that we can hear from, be guided by, and financially support and uplift the work of the diverse people most impacted and harmed by industrial agriculture. So I would also, in the same vein, suggest something like an advisory group to be able to listen to, lift up, and embrace the lived experiences of the people most impacted through a program like this. I think that's equity at its heart. So I just wanted to say that. So suggestions for success. What does success look like within the context of Msoc or otherwise? How can we enable the participation of those most impacted? Not only enable them, but meet them where they are, pay them to do this work in any way that we can, bring the funds to the communities and to the supply chain, bring the money in to the grassroots efforts and to the communities who need them. Regenerative, resilient, pasture-based farms can't be scaled to the size that industrial operations can, and we don't want them to be. We know that. We want to see the replication of these farms dotting the landscape all over the country so that many more farmers can start and grow operations to feed their communities. We need many small, diverse, regenerative systems feeding local communities. In this instance, I'm not referring to small as a size necessarily, but as a set of values and methods of operation. Small represents our working in close connection to one another. For a truly transparent food system built on trust and focused on health, we need close relationships and connectivity. We need to be able to steward and safeguard our land, environment, people, and animals. Yes, but maybe most of all, we need to bring humanity back to our food system. Let's define the small food systems we want to see, where we are close and accountable to one another and where we can quickly pivot during times of crisis. So we need systems where mobile processing and cottage food kitchens are available to communities. People need to have access to information, training, networking, and engagement. I think you all know these things. So I'm probably preaching to the choir here a little bit, but at SRAP, we understand intimately the needs for communities to speak up and to hold lawmakers, agencies, and corporations accountable to the people. We understand this because we see the damage that is caused when there's no one holding them accountable. So I would argue that there is need for such engagement, collaboration, and accountability here too. And that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Brian, you muted.
Yeah, you think I'd get used to this now after 3 years on Zoom, however long it's been. Thank you, Sherri. That was a fantastic presentation. And I think really sort of rounds out the thorniness of this program and these issues and trying to work across regions. Dr. Jablonski, your work demonstrated that land grant institutions can do some very exciting work in this field to work with local partners. Not all of them are the same. And so I think it's incredibly important that as a part of this space is that we're creating, making today to be building those collaborations and coalitions across regions, that the sustainable agriculture working groups that may have at one point existed are largely just limited to the Northeast now. And so it's very exciting to see the reinvigoration of this regional working group. But unfortunately, we don't have all the answers, and it's going to take an iterative approach to working it out, working through the ambiguity, and trying to make the most of this award, because I do, at the end of the day, think this holds a lot of promise in trying to create food systems that are far more resilient. So let's see. We are going to split out into breakout groups now for you all to talk and begin to think about the ways that this program can work in your region. We're asking you to break out based on the FNS regions that are on this map. This is not to say that this is how the regions will be broken out in the award, but just what we thought was an easy way to go about it for this event. During this time, we ask that you consider the questions. Patty, can you mind posting the link to the Google document in the chat? So there's some breakout questions that we're just asking you to generally broadly consider. What institutions, organizations, and government agencies are you currently interacting with, and at what levels, what scales, to support local and regional supply chain development? What would help to facilitate interaction between councils and organizations that support local and regional supply chain development in your region? Are there groups already coordinating efforts in your region? And what are the barriers that make it challenging to organize efforts regionally? What are ways to ensure communities most impacted by food systems injustice can benefit from the regional food business centers? And what information would be important to know about the region to ensure food systems equity? I realize that's a lot and we're throwing at you. I really just am fascinated to hear everyone's thoughts. If you could put them into the Google document based on your region, it's been organized out so that each group should have their own page, and understanding that it'll probably get to be more than that. We've got some time set aside at the end of this, the breakout session, to report out some of the top 2 or 3 findings, but we'll leave the document open after this event so you can continue to add input that we'll find we'll be interested in understanding. So before you jump into tackling those questions, take a moment to introduce yourselves within the group, identify a facilitator, note taker, and someone to report the highlights from your conversation. And again, please use this document to record all of your notes. And like I said, we're very interested to hear all the feedback and thoughts that you have. So I know we're starting to creep up on time. I will stop talking and let everybody else talk for a change. Great. Welcome back, everyone. I hope that was an exciting conversation. We'll take a few minutes because we are scheduled to wrap up at quarter past. We'll go through the different groups, and if you could share your primary highlight from the conversation. I know that's not doing justice to the rich conversation that likely took place, but we'll be happy to check the notes and learn everything that was going on. So why don't we do things a little bit differently and go from left to right? I know California is usually behind in time, at least. So yeah, let's go start with the West Coast, Western region. What was your highlight from your conversation?
I'll jump in, and I would say that the highlight was that there are a lot of good things in the works, and people are working at a very local level, but there's still, of course, opportunity for more connection and really learning about how to access the resources that exist, especially for smaller communities.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your contribution. All right, Southwest.
I nominate Susan to give the report out since she was taking notes.
Okay. Gosh, we were talking about just the oddness of this grouping of states in particular. We're just really hoping that this is not the regions that they end up sticking with for the RFP when it comes out, because Louisiana and Texas are really sort of islands onto their own. They don't really collaborate with the Western states. Arizona is actually in it's misclassified. It's supposed to be in the Western region.
No,
So
I'm sorry, Susan, that was me. I had to like check. I was like, okay, I'm getting confused again. We recently moved from west to southwest, so the map is correct.
Okay.
When we first started these conversations, I'm like, how long have we been having this conversation now on these? And I remember when we were first having the conversation, we had recently switched. So that map was, so the map now is correct, but
Okay.
earlier in the day it wasn't. We've since left west, now we're southwest. Thank you.
Well, we're definitely hoping that Louisiana is going to be grouped with Mississippi, Arkansas, like more with the deep South, mid South. But one of the pieces of conversation that we were discussing as well is that my understanding, and this is broad generalization, but that many of the food policy councils that I'm connected with and in relationship with have really a lot of relationships with agencies, institutions, et cetera, but not necessarily a lot of supply chain relationships. And that this initiative is very much like farm level to the sale. So just thinking about more of that value chain, like how can we build more relationships between food policy councils and food hubs, farmers cooperatives, et cetera. And I know that's a vast generalization. I know that there are some that have been really involved in value chain work, but that's something that we were considering need more collaboration across networks like FPN with Food Systems Leadership Network, NSAC, and others that have more relationships with farmers cooperatives, and supply chain enterprises.
Fantastic. Thank you for your contribution. All right, Mountain Plains. And then Midwest is on deck.
Okay, our group made some really good connections in Missouri. We had a bunch of Missouri folks there. So, all right, Missouri.
Is that the contribution submitted for the record?
We mostly spent time talking about the connections, who we are reaching out to currently and who we could and what would be good partnerships.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Midwest and then Southeast, you're on deck.
Roger or Kabibi, you want to go or you want me to go since I typed the notes? I'm willing to take one for the team, but okay. All right, I typed the notes. I got to ask the questions and let the smart people talk. Let's see. There was a lot of connections. Both Kabibi and Roger were in my group from the Midwest, and they both are working with lots of different folks within their states to work on regional food system building. So Kabibi mentioned working with Michigan State University, being very thankful for the center that they have there. Roger made me question how big his staff is because he listed so many things, but he did point out that a lot of the work that they do and a lot of the stuff that he mentioned is in partnership, close partnership. So they might have one piece of that then someone else is kind of leading the charge on, but they're also contributing to it, whether it's policy efforts or working with institutions, lots of different institutions on programs to get food into the hands of folks who need it. So that was super interesting. We talked about capacity problems, certainly having staff not have enough time and energy to be able to dedicate to all the activities that need to happen, especially even coming to meetings like this versus if you come to a meeting like this, then you miss out on something else, having to have scheduling conflicts, et cetera. And then whenever programs like this come up, how they're going to be able to engage meaningfully and really get the work done. Also interesting of note, well, at least it was to me, was Roger brought up I mentioned that, these USDA grants, when you're applying for grants, if you're actually able to apply for the grant, oftentimes the different regions are competing for the exact same money. And so maybe there's competition to some degree and protectiveness of programs that are happening because you don't want to not get the money. So you only have a 20% chance of getting the grant. So that's oftentimes a barrier to being able to really work across either a locality or even a state line. So Roger or Kabibi, do you want to add to anything I said? That's going off memory and mine's pretty terrible. So. He gives a thumbs up. Okay.
Okay, great. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you to the Midwest for your contributions. All right, Southeast. with the
We
Mid-Atlantic
spent,
context?
we spent most of our time getting to know each other. So a lot of people
Great.
from North Carolina, a lot of people from Florida, some of us holding it down in South Carolina. Honestly, we barely scratched the surface with the questions. I would say the biggest take home is that we have a very unfortunate and tragic history in the Southeast as it relates to food systems. And that is underlying all of the work we do. And there's a lot of mistrust, well earned, around agency work, federally funded programs, even the land grant institutions. So there's a lot to unpack there. And I think that there's just a need for honest conversations in this process on how a lot of the states in the Southeast are going to have to work through some pretty heavy stuff to get to a place of collaboration with trust, and not having grassroots organizations leverage their social capital to bring folks to the table only to have no power in the decision making, because that has been the pattern that we've experienced. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, fantastic comment.
I'll just
Yep.
add one additional thing.
Please.
Elizabeth thankfully shared the opportunity for us to continue the conversation. And so I definitely think it seemed like folks were very open to that. So we don't just want to, have our little 10 minutes of time to chat here, but hopefully continue the conversation and hopefully be able to submit a really meaningful RFP when the time comes.
Fantastic. Well, that really tees up my closing, but we have 2 groups left to go. So Mid-Atlantic, take it away.
Hey everyone, Christine Heiser here from Pennsylvania Department of Human Services, representing the Mid-Atlantic group. We talked a little bit about some of the confounding nature of the regional nature of this money, but then also wanting to support some of these smaller agricultural entities or BIPOC agricultural entities, which often cases may not cover, supply multiple states. So we talked a little bit about food hubs and how they can cross state lines in many cases, maybe being a good entity to kind of wrangle some of those smaller producers for the purposes of this money. We also talked about the schools being a natural anchor and potential way of getting some of these funds out to connect them with some of the smaller producers. We also talked a little bit about supporting migrant farm workers and also relying on community agents that are really that trusted messenger to communities wherever they are, whether they be faith-based organizations or community organizations, social service entities, really who is that trusted person within those communities that can do that outreach to make sure that you're reaching the people that you're trying to reach. So those are just a few of the things we touched on.
Fantastic. And last but not least, Northeast region.
Hi, well, a lot of people have said many of the things that we talked about, so I won't repeat them, but we talked about the fact that we are all involved in a lot of networks and coalitions, but they're overlapping, and also these regions are big, and so we had some concerns about how you actually get organized to do something effective, and also how you ensure how whoever is doing it ensures that some of the smaller and very local but very, very important entities, whether they be ag or food, are involved, and how you figure out which ones need to be or how those sectors get represented. I don't know if our notes are pretty complete, I think. I don't know if anybody from my group wants to add anything real quick.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you all. Thank you to the participants, to you all, and for your contributions to this session, this dialogue. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to the Center for a Livable Future and the Food Policy Network. This is really just what I hope is the start of the conversation. And so we hope to continue it. So yeah, thank you all and look forward to being in touch.